Mr. President, I rise today. I think I'm the only thing standing between this body and a vote on something that 2 years ago I didn't know existed. That's a vote-a-rama in local Senate terms. As a matter of fact, being an outsider to the political process, I find a lot of this very strange. I came to Washington, and now I've seen a new vocabulary. It includes things like scoring, that doesn't have anything to do with sports, by the way, vote-a-rama, that doesn't have anything to do with the carnival down the road, or a deficit-neutral reserve fund. I'm still trying to figure out what that is. I see the President of the Senate smiling today up there, and then points of order. So there is a vocabulary centered around what we're going to be doing this afternoon. But I want to speak to the budget process itself. First of all, I want to be very clear with my colleagues on both sides. I support this budget that we're going to vote on today for one very strong reason. That is, it's a vehicle to get to tax reform in the United States. I won't speak on tax today in the few minutes that I have, but I do want to speak about the process. Mr. President, what we are doing in America right now because of the Senate and Congress and what we've been doing over the last 43 years is we are losing the right to do the right thing. Let me say that again. We're losing the right to do the right thing. Just a few weeks ago, we voted without batting an eye for $15 billion of allocated funds for the victims of 2 hurricanes in Florida and Texas and other southern states. Mr. President, every dime of that money is borrowed money. We have to go to China and other places and borrow that money so that we can spend and do the right things. That is not an embellishment or an exaggeration. What about research for the rising, spiraling cost of our health care, driven by Alzheimer's, cancer, and diabetes? We spend about the same amount of money on that as we spend on all foreign aid, and yet, if we were to do more, we could solve those heinous diseases and lower our medical costs. We can invest in our infrastructure, Mr. President. We could absolutely take care of victims of wildfires, and now we have Puerto Rico. Even tonight, we're going to be asked to vote on, up and down vote, on a supplemental bill for some $30+ billion for the needs of these catastrophes. Well, Mr. President, we have lost the right to do the right thing, which is, of course, to meet those needs. But here's the biggest one. You just heard my great colleague, Senator McCain from Arizona. He's the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, of which I am a member, and talks about how decimated our military is from a funding standpoint. He talked about readiness. He talked about capitalization. But today, we're borrowing every dime we spend on our military, on our veterans, and on every domestic discretionary program in the United States. That's a fact. So where do we get the money from when we run out of our own money? We spend every dime of our tax. By the way, we collected over $3.5 trillion of federal tax revenue last year, Mr. President. It's the largest amount America has ever collected in income taxes and total taxes for the federal government. The most we've ever spent, most we've ever collected. But all that money goes to mandatory expenses. As a matter of fact, our government has grown just in 2 presidencies since 2000, under one Republican president, one Democratic president. Our government has grown from $2.4 trillion to $4 trillion, Mr. President. And that's not the worst of it. The worst is yet to come. We've added in 2 presidencies $14 trillion to our federal debt. Of our $20 trillion, 14 of it was added under these 2 presidents. In the next 10 years, the current budget under which we're working will add another $11 trillion to our debt. Now, here's the problem, Mr. President. The blue line here is what you heard Senator McCain talk about earlier. That's our discretionary spending. It's flat. As a matter of fact, between 2009 and today, we've lowered discretionary spending by $400 billion, over a third. But what's happened is our mandatory expenses have exploded. And as this chart says, this line here are our mandatory expenses. That's Social Security, Medicare, pension and benefits for federal employees, and the interest on the debt. Mr. President, this is a formula for financial disaster. We already have, at this point here, $20 trillion of debt. Just over the next 30 years, some estimates say we have over $130 trillion of future commitments, liabilities coming at us like a freight train. Mr. President, we are hamstrung because we have a budget process that doesn't work. And one thing that contributes to this is a process that over the last 43 years, since the 1974 Budget Act was put in place that created this budget process, the budget has only worked 4 times in 43 years. It's only funded the federal government 4 times. That's not a partisan comment, Mr. President. That is an indictment on this body and on the body across the hall here. 4 times. In any other environment, sports, medicine, business, military. Imagine if you had a process that only worked 4 times. Imagine if you had a tank in World War II and you're over there and only 4 times, every 43 times you fired it, only worked 4 times. Imagine what the result would be. What we have here is a system that doesn't work, and I'm going to try to explain that very quickly. First, we have committees in the United States Senate, Mr. President, that involve themselves in appropriation and the funding of the federal government. One are called authorizing committees. These are committees like State Department, Foreign Relations. We have appropriations. We have all of these authorizing committees over here on the left. On the right here are appropriation committees. Now, these committees have to pass today 12 bills in order to fund the federal government. Now, over the last 43 years, Mr. President, out of the 12 bills that we have to appropriate to fund the government, we have only averaged 2.5. 2.5 bills, Mr. President. In any other world, that can't work. It doesn't work here. So we end up with 179 continuing resolutions that get us past the end of our fiscal year to continue spending at last year's rate. And then we go to an omnibus, another new term that I never heard of up here, at the end of the calendar year, basically most times, that 6 or 8 people will get in a room and decide how to spend $1 trillion. The current budget only deals with primarily issues that are not in the mandatory side. Mr. President, there is a way forward. There are members of the other side, and I'm going to call out one. My good friend from the state of Rhode Island, Senator Whitehouse, and I, and others have been working on this for quite some time. He has a great idea. Let's pick a point in the future. Make the debt a percentage of our GDP and then work backwards from there with guardrails on what we can do every year. There is a budget process that we've been working on that creates a politically neutral platform, Mr. President, that allows both sides in a bipartisan way to argue and fight over what we think the budget should include because we believe the budget should be a law. Today, the budget is only a resolution, which means it's nothing but a political statement by the majority party. We then go to an authorizing process, Mr. President, where the minority party, because they weren't asked to play in the budget process, we have an authorizing process that today we have over $300 billion of federal expenditures a year that are not authorized. Over $300 billion. Then we are supposed to go to an appropriation process. Like I just said, we've only appropriated on average over those 43 years 2.5 bills a year instead of the 12. Mr. President, we can fix this. It's not a partisan issue. We will absolutely fix this budget process in a bipartisan way. I'm going to vote for this. I hope my colleagues will vote for this budget bill so we can get on and debate tax. Mr. President, the debt crisis is the #1 crisis we face in our country. It keeps us from doing the right thing, funding our federal national defense, taking care of our domestic needs. Mr. President, I will support this budget today, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. With that, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.